welcome along. There's so many new people here. I wasn't going to do an introduction, but I kind of feel we should. I'll stand up, and there's a reason for this as well. A couple of reasons for this, but it's so obviously my name's Steve Harvey, not to be confused by the famous American comedian of the same name. You get the Aldi Special Buys version. All right. So it's really welcome along. This is number 9. Josh and I were talking about today of doing this, and it's gradually getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as the more new people are coming in, it's the attractiveness levels and the handsomeness levels are going up. So,
Hang on. I think we set the bar pretty high at the start.
you, mate, how many times did I tell you this? You are my favourite safety person. All right. So, guys, welcome. I absolutely love doing this. It's a brilliant laugh. We'll do. Josh, you want to do an introduction, or are you happy just to?
I'm Josh. It's been
an alcoholic.
3 minutes since my last beer.
Yeah. Cool. Reason for normally we have the leathery. Try saying that when you're Glaswegian, and a leathery Chesterfield. But a couple of reasons for this. One, people were complaining about the sound. They couldn't hear up the back. But I've really damaged my hip as well, so I can't get out of those bloody chairs. I'd need Bishop to lift me out, and that'd be really, really embarrassing. So we'll sit up nice and high. Josh, what have we got coming up? Thank you to the amazing Gary Marling for sponsoring tonight's sort of pizzas and drinks.
Okay.
And Cameron too, thank you, both of you.
Thank you, man.
Without our sponsors, we wouldn't get pizzas and all that sort of thing, so it's really, really important. So if any of you guys want to sponsor it, and you get your name and lights, so thank you, Gary and Cam. But I think the last time we saw most of these was the Wollongong Palooza. So this is the good, the bad, and the ugly. You guys can decide what order that is in. But my big takeaway from the Palooza: don't ride scooters when you're drunk. All right, that was it. What was that?
Is that what you did to your hip?
No. That was a nice and easy fall. That one, the one that I took last week, wasn't so easy. But yeah, that was an amazing experience. It was brilliant. Lots of you guys were there. It was awesome to see you and catch up with you and talk all things Bookclub. And how good was that bloody band though? That was a session and a half, that one. So, and Josh has been putting a dent in the universe, travelling all over the place. Him and his big crocodile. What was the crocodile called again, mate? Baz the Croc. So Josh has been over at Energy Safety Canada, and apparently you made a spelling mistake, and somebody called him out in New Zealand. So he's been presenting the same stuff for about fucking
3 years.
Now, Justina's not here, but I kind of wanted to share it. So I've been, as with most stories with me, it starts off with alcohol. So I do a wee bit of stand-up comedy on the side. Right, I'm not very funny. I'm a bit boring, actually. And I had a couple of beers one night, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to put in a conference paper and say how stand-up comedy can influence safety. And the bloody Americans picked it up. So I was like, oh, I'm not going to do it. I won't do it because it's far away and I'm a bit scared. And then Josh was like, shut up. You're going. And everybody I was talking to was saying, you guys would be mad if you didn't do it. You really need to go and do it. So I'm kind of petrified, but really, really excited at the same time. So I'm looking forward to going to Chol. And Georgina's going to Chol as well, so she'll be there. So the both of us are putting a dent in for the Aussies, or the Scozzies, over in Las Vegas. Imagine letting a Glaswegian loose in Vegas, eh? That'll be the lighthouse for the drunk, that one. This is really super important. We want to talk to you about this one. So Josh and I, was that about 6 months ago, mate? Maybe a wee bit, a couple of months ago, we had these guys reach out to us and say, hey, we'd really love to come over to Brisbane and do some work over there. Just come for a holiday, but could you help us put together a conference? Josh and I both went like, oh, we've never done anything like that before. Yeah, let's have a red hot crack, right? So we're really, really supporting these guys. They really are relying on us. They're relying on our network. Now, even if you don't subscribe to HRO theory, you are going to learn heaps in this. We're starting to see some of the stuff that guys are producing. They're really putting heaps and heaps of effort into this. So we would appreciate your support if you can. I've got no freebie tickets. If I did, I would promise you would be the first people to get them. Even we're having to pay. All right, but we're both speaking at it, and I really, really think you get a lot from it. So if you can, it's very reasonable as well, and that's the reason why we're. Like Josh is really big on. I think you called it out right away, didn't you, mate? You said, like, if it's not for the community and it's not cheap, I'm not being involved. And I was like, oh, bang on, totally agree. And these are guys that worked in nuclear power and all that sort of thing, so they're bringing knowledge that we just don't have. So it'd be good, particularly you guys that sort of dabble in the mining space. I know, Christian, you're in the mining space. You'll probably start to see us share a lot more over the next few days and weeks. So I'd appreciate it if you'd jump in or even just share it or like it or whatever, because it's been pretty cool. So, mate, how lucky are we to have this guy? I had to beg him, right? But when we announced that Ben was coming,
This is the highest praise you can get.
I know. As soon as I saw that, I was like, screamed up straight to Josh. And I was like, this is how he's getting introduced. So if you make this guy happy, what's that?
He even liked it. Dom never liked anything, but
Did he like his own post? Is that the same comment?
So that is high praise indeed, mate. So please, everybody, welcome Ben to the Brisbane Safety Differently Book Club. So, mate, welcome aboard.
Thanks.
So first question is really that little blog that you're writing. It's basically blew up all over the world, right? And everyone loves it. Did you kind of feel that it would get to that stage where it's become as big as what it has done?
Look, the more palatable explanation around it is it was for altruistic reasons, but it was really just for myself. There's a lot of stuff I want to read. There's a lot of stuff I want to go back to, quotes and, and data. I found it was like the easiest way to be able to do that. So I really have to thank LinkedIn because they have like the shittiest UX possible. Like they've got out of their way to make it as hard as possible for people to actually find the stuff they've written. Yeah. So that pushed me onto the cheapest possible platform, which is WordPress. It's completely free. The advertising's not mine. It's, I guess, the generic stuff to pay for the platform. It was just a happy coincidence that people are actually interested in accessing it, I guess. So it's sort of just grown from there.
Yeah, mate, yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it? It's like these people all over the world sort of commenting on it. Mate, this is another sort of question. Came from a university researcher. He'll remain nameless. But he sort of wants to know, and I kind of think we all want to know, how the hell do you read that stuff so quickly? How do you make sense of it? How do you, like, it would take me weeks to navigate this stuff, and it also takes Yop weeks. It takes Yop's week to navigate that. So tell me, what's the secret for us and also Yop?
Love you, Yop. No one's accused me of actually understanding it. I mean, it's stuff I was going to read anyway. There's really no magic to it. It's Google Scholar. I'm on Google Scholar constantly. It's like just part of my life now. So anyone can do it. You set up alerts in Google Scholar. You can tell it anything you want to know, and it'll fire back emails within 2 days. Every 2 days, whatever you told it to alert you to. I've just kind of just set it in my routines now. That's what I do. I probably only summarize a small number of the stuff I read, but I guess what I'm saying is that it's the stuff that I need to know, the stuff I want to actually remember. The other stuff I read, I don't remember. So if there's something that I actually am interested in, I find it useful just to sort of document it. And so the blog just kind of worked really well for that reason.
Do you use like ChatGPT now for any of that stuff? Do you use any of the AI tools to sort of help summarize it?
I use them, but I use them quite a bit, but for different ways. So I prefer Gemini, which is the Google one. I've found it's not very good at what I want to do. Like, it's very good at taking the most obvious stuff. Like, it takes the abstract, it takes a few of the key sort of search terms or the key themes. It takes like the first sentence out of paragraphs and just plonks it down into a nice sort of structure. But by the time I actually get through it, I've read it, I'm like, I could have just done it myself. The problem is you just don't know if you can trust it. You can ask it to calculate its confidence levels around what it's produced, but then you have no way to trust the actual confidence levels. So I use it for other ways, and I think there's a lot of strengths and utility in what they can provide. So it's very good at pointing out logical fallacies. So if I'm writing something, if I'm uncertain about, like statistics, it absolutely thumps at statistics. So if there's something you don't understand about statistics, you can go to a textbook and bore yourself to death, or you can go onto like Gemini or ChatGPT. You can ask it very intuitive questions around what do they mean by the Pearson's correlation? What would it mean if I was using that in safety? It's actually very good at that very practical sort of stuff. So look, I'm more than happy to handball and to offload tasks to be lazy. I just haven't found one with my prompts to actually do what I need to do.
Oh, awesome, mate. So there you go, Yop. If you can start firing out this stuff.
You said you actually have to read everything.
That's not what I'm looking for here.
Mate, I know for me, like I've been in this sort of safety differently world or whatever for about 10 years now. And I know that Professor Decker was like a massive influence on me. I'm just sort of wondering who influences you, or is there any sort of writers that you think, or safety influencers even, like Dom, or anyone that can really...
So speaking out to the crowd.
Oh, that's me told. Any influencers or writers, mate, that really, really inspire you?
It's always been Barry Turner. So Kim Bill's actually awesome paper. Highly recommend you check out Kim's paper. He's spoken about Barry Turner's work. So Barry Turner was originally an engineer, and then he did his PhD in sociology. You may have heard of man-made disasters. It was sort of the most pivotal sort of work, I think, in the early sociological movement of safety and disasters, really. It's more about disasters. I think I was put onto his work right from the start of my safety career. Like probably most safety people, I didn't set out to start and work in safety, kind of fell into it from other areas. But his work was right at the front. I think it was probably Andrew Hopkins that sort of put me onto him. His work sort of transformed, even to this day, the way I conceptualise safety is mostly a social construct. It's something that's negotiated by groups of people. So definitely his work. And I think what was sort of really cutting about it was, and Kim's paper really nicely sort of discusses the trajectory of Turner's work, is it was very undervalued and underknown, underappreciated. So you had people like Charles Perrow. I think most people probably know of Charles Perrow's work around man-made normal accidents, and his work was really well known, but Turner's wasn't, even though Turner's work was earlier and had, I think, far more readily sort of intuitive findings from the disasters. So to this day, like it's always Turner, go back to Turner's work.
Yeah, mate, no, that's... I know that, Nicky, you've been dabbling in and all this sort of stuff. I mean, you're like... You come in... Nicky will come into the office and say, I've been reading this. I'm reading like Barry... What was it you've just had a look at recently? Yeah, post-normal accident.
So I don't do my own work, I let someone else do it.
Yeah, and Nicky's coming in going blah 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 blah, blah, and it's amazing, mate. It really is cool. Mate, you know that I've messaged you a couple of times and said, hey Ben, have you got a blog on this? Have you got this stuff around? But I had a look because I was doing my research for this, and one really caught my eye. It was about the workers in oil and gas. Obviously, we're the few of us here from oil and gas, and it really talked about these bureaucratic tasks that we're doing and these activities, teams. What other notes have I got here? Emails, meetings, team chats. This and this affects everybody's ability to get out and about in the field. I was just wondering, what was your findings in that? And any sort of advice for? And I'm sure this impacts every single person in this room. Any sort of advice for us?
So one is bureaucracy is a pretty dirty word, but it really shouldn't be. There's actually some really prominent researchers have looked at bureaucracy. It's a very human thing, and it's pretty much an inevitable product of humans doing work collectively in large sort of organisations. But it definitely can go too far. My own reflections on that research, there's a lot of other studies that have looked at the bureaucratisation and the structuration which is like the informal practices then get formalised and sort of fed through the machine, is you can definitely spend a lot of your time trying to resist it, and I think that's not necessarily the best place to invest your time. So I definitely think we should do whatever we can to declutter and remove unnecessary bureaucracy. But the other side of it is there's this insatiable desire for assurance and governance. And Michael Power has spoken about this far more than probably anyone else around the audit explosion. So he's spoken about through the 1980s and 1990s, there's just been an explosion of desires for assurance. And actually, Drew Ray's spoken about the difference between assurance and insurance. Insurance is the actual creation of safety. Assurance is sort of the verification or governance around it. I think you can spend a lot of time trying to remove it and still end up at the same place. It's very hard to resist it because it's very hard to get away from it. Everyone wants to be able to have that assurance. My own reflections on it is I think what we really should, well, what I'm interested in doing is remove what we can, but focus more on just getting closer to the front line, the work. I think it's the ethical thing to do. I mean, the people with the most skin in the game are the people who die or lose arms. They also have the most insights to deliver to us. So I think instead of trying to remove all the back-end bullshit, I'd rather just focus my time getting closer to the front lines, getting that feedback and intel to feed back up. The bureaucracy's still going to be there. It's going to be there tomorrow when you go back to it. I think let's just stop focusing on it and focus on the stuff that we think is more useful for the company. So that's my own philosophy around how to approach it. Declutter what you can, but focus most of your efforts on the stuff that matters the most. So it's actually pretty good, I think, around the critical control approaches. I have issues with the lack of published validity around it, but I like the idea that it's trying to get us back to the stuff that mostly sort of I think matters, is the stuff that kills or permanently alters someone's life.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of the same around bureaucracy. That.
Yeah, well, mate, you kind of spoke about that at the Palooza. You know, so anybody that wasn't at the Palooza, I just call it the Grand Palooza because it was just basically a big party. All right, but there was lots of amazing speakers, which Ben was one of them. And you talked about, you know, like these auditors that are like they grab a hold of like first aid kits and fire extinguishers, and I've experienced that, mate. That is definitely something I find it really, really frustrated. But one of the things you were talking about artifacts and how artifacts will change as they go through different hands. Can you sort of elaborate a wee bit more on that for us?
So artifacts are products of human activity, so they could be safety. We talk about a lot of safety documents, so they're artifacts. It could be music, it could be clothing, it could be chairs. Humans create artifacts. They're expressions of symbolism, they're expressions of values and art and all these sort of things. So what we found, and there's other researchers have found this before I did, I was looking more at the effect in auditing specifically, but there's a really good paper that I saw one of your questions later we'll sort of talk to, but there's this really great paper from Pentland and Feldman, and the title's something like On the Folly of Creating Artifacts when what we really intended was to change the pattern of action. So what they're essentially saying is we create documents and paperwork when what we really meant to do was actually change some sort of operational risk or operational practice. And you can see it really from, talk about the audit scope, like a permit to work. You have an investigation, there was an incident that involved the permit to work process, maybe entering the confined space or verifications of the hazardous gas levels. And instead of actually really unpacking the task of someone entering a confined space, we revise the document, the process of a confined space entry. And when you think about it, they're not actually the same thing. Like you can create and change documents and they may have very little or no impact on the actual practices and people's understanding, the routines, the things that they actually do. So the research that I was doing was really looking at do audits really propagate and focus on the products of work rather than the actual more directly correlated with the work itself. And probably one of the more interesting things I found in that research was, I think everyone expects audits will focus on paperwork. What I found really interesting was the audits tended to conflate work with the products of work. So like one of the examples was the traffic management plan, the audit criteria wanted to understand traffic hazards. And the auditor looked at the traffic management plan, So what we're arguing was that they're not the same thing. Like, you can go through a plan, that's fine if that's what your goal is, but you may be no better off in understanding actual traffic management on site by looking at the plan, and they're not the same thing. So audits do it, risk assessments do it, investigations do it a lot. It is a very normal human thing to do, but it's also a very false sense of safety. And I think that we can really convince ourselves that things are safer than they really are, that social construction of risk and safety, but it isn't matched by reality.
Yeah.
In construction, I'm going to talk about Australian construction. I don't see it as much as a selling point. I certainly don't see it in tenders so much anymore. I still see it in a lot of branding and slogans. But road traffic, this is where it started, Vision Zero. It started in road traffic, international road traffic. I think it's still live and kicking in that sort of facet. And there was actually a really interesting study. It was a theoretical one, but this was based on about 20 years worth of data from one of the Nordic countries. And they said if they did the calculations, and if you put all the interventions in place today that sort of the zero harm philosophy would sort of require, where would we be in 20 years? And they found that you'd completely bankrupt the country and they would still have too many deaths. It really got me thinking though, I'm not a supporter of zero harm, but I can understand sort of the seduction and the allure to it. What I really disagree with isn't so much the philosophy of it. I think there are ethical issues. Mine's more of the scientific basis. I'm interested in the science, and for something that's so endemic across Australia at least, there's virtually no evidence underpinning it. We have really no idea whether a zero harm philosophy leads to any better outcomes that we're after. Certainly there's subjective stories, and someone, it was on LinkedIn, so it has to be true, but someone made the argument, like out of the ASX 100 companies, I can't remember what it was, but the highest performing were zero harm companies. And the problem with that argument is it sort of makes sense on the surface, but what you don't know is the direction of causality. What we don't know is whether the zero harm helped get them to that stage or whether the more mature ones adopt it. And certainly there's research around accreditation. So like 9001, 18001, 45001's a bit new for the research, but there's certainly a bit of research that shows that organisations that have 18001 in Europe tended to be safer before they got accreditation. So you can interpret that incorrectly, but you could draw the wrong conclusions from that. So they did a longitudinal study to do that, to look at the direction of causality. You can't really do that with cross-sectional, but the point is you have to be really careful about these claims. And Carl Sagan, one of my favourite science researchers, he has this expression. He said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." I think if you're making a claim and it's an empirical claim, it really needs to be supported by empirical evidence. And zero harm, as far as I can find, has almost none. It has studies, don't get me wrong, but very little demonstrating that it leads to benefits in the organisation. And on its own, I don't think that's such an issue. The issue is that it's taking resources away from things that we do know works generally on the balance. And I always meant to do this study as part of my PhD, but I think if you took 100 of the last safety alerts or 100 of the last investigations from, let's say, 10 zero harm organisations versus 10 equally mature but none zero harm, I always thought that the companies of zero harm would focus more on minor stuff. They would still investigate the serious stuff, but they'd proportionally be focusing more on the minor stuff. And to me, that really seems like the wrong focus. I mean, there's really only a handful of things that kill people in a workplace. And I think you have to be absolutely militant around those factors. That isn't by command and control, but it's understanding how people interact with those hazards. How do we design and create really user-centered workplace design, schedules, feedback mechanisms. Communication feedback comes up in every accident ever. One part of it is because you're always going to find it, successful or not. But I think there is something to it. So I think really the point with zero harm is there needs to be better empirical evidence behind it. Otherwise, I think it's just another idea.
Yeah, no, awesome. Mate, I think that was a beautifully put answer. That was absolutely magnificent. Mate, I've got one more question for you, then I'll throw it out to the gang for a couple. But mate, I'm keen to. You have probably studied or at least had a look at every single safety theory that there is going. Just wondering if you lean into one a wee bit more, and if there's one that we should be tapping into.
Isn't it like 42 is like the answer?
I don't know. I didn't even know there was as much as that. But
my philosophy is, if there was a scale of like 0 to 10, 10's your extreme, 0 is completely indifferent. I prefer to be somewhere around like right of centre. I think you have to be really careful to take any idea, concept too far. Because again, to go back to Carl Sagan's quote, like you really need really strong convincing evidence to go from any direction. So my philosophy is, I like the idea of requisite variety. So in cybernetics, there was this idea from Ashby that variety destroys variety. So if you have a certain number of states in a system, then you need at least as many of those states, if not more, to be able to sort of quell and control that level of variability. I think it's the same with our cognitive and our worldviews, the cognitive ideas and our worldviews. I think we're better off broadening the horizon. So actually Barry Turner called it the perceptual horizon. Gerd Gigerenzer, another researcher, he called it the adaptive toolbox. You really want to be able to draw on a greater number of empirically supported ideas to be able to piece something together that fits the context. So I haven't found the universal one that I align to. My own prejudice and bias is towards systems thinking. But I would never actively confuse or conflate a systems idea with reality. For me, it's a frame to help you think and to frame ideas. It shouldn't be confused with actual reality.
Yeah. So it's like taking a piece of. You probably take a piece of everything and then sort of.
Within reason, like I think you still need to be empirically driven. Like I think that we need to look for and push for evidence. If there's no evidence, we either need to seek it and find that evidence ourselves, or we need to reject it. But I see fewer reasons, generally speaking, to limit myself. I'll throw this out there. Like, I find the community that I'm part of, I'd say I'm probably loosely part of, is the Safety Differently, Safety 2, the adaptive philosophies. I find this community to be one of the most hostile towards when I bring up things about behaviour. And I find that really baffling because behaviour's always been part of human factors. It's always been part of adaptive thinking. It's been there from at least the 50s for the Francophone ergonomics philosophy, which gave us a lot of the things we use today. I don't know why we'd actively want to abandon one of the most heavily research-based streams of research. I can understand the motives. People are sick of this focus on people rather than systems and organisational factors, but I feel like the level of hostility towards behavioural approaches, to me, it just baffles me. And I think we don't have to throw it out. Like we can step on the shoulders of giants and expand our thinking. So my view is to expand my thinking, not restrict it.
No, mate, again, beautifully put. Absolutely brilliant. Mate, J. Osh Prager, he asked a question. I sent everybody an email, and not many people responded. I have to be honest. I was a bit disappointed, right? But it's all right. Maybe it went to junk mail. But Josh sort of was asking about, what's been your favourite paper that you've reviewed, and what's been really right, or what's sort of really cleared up some contentious issue for you?
I'm not sure about the most contentious, but a paper that I really like, and I liken it to poetry, is this. I've referred to it a few times. It's by Bob Wares. It's The Tragedy of Adaptability. And for like a 2 or 3 page paper, it was the hardest paper for me to summarise. Every single line was just this hard-hitting statement that I just completely aligned with. Essentially what Bob was arguing is the most adaptable element in any system is a human, it's people. And because we're so adaptable, we come to rely on the performance of people. And a lot of that performance is actually invisible. So David Woods talks about the law of fluency. Essentially what people do to adapt becomes invisible. We just assume that that's what happens because we've got these really fancy, shiny ass systems. But in fact, it's people that are filling in the gaps, finishing the design out in the field. And eventually people just burn out. And the proverbial hits the fan because people just can't adapt. Now, he was looking at healthcare. And you look at the problems with healthcare, when you have tired doctors who have been working like a 48+ hour shift, people's lives are literally on the line with that sort of stuff. So I think Bob's paper, for only like 3 or 4 pages, is still, I think, the most hard-hitting paper. And I've gone back to it. I go back to it several times a year for quotes, for ideas. So I think he just absolutely nailed that theme. He talks about people being tangled up like pretzels. In the fact that we just have to do so much to get systems to function, and they look good on the surface. It's like the duck who's paddling under the surface. So that one's, I think, is one of my favourites.
Awesome, mate. Yeah. And Kaz, I made sense of the question that you asked yesterday. Kaz wants to know what's been the most surprising piece of research that you've encountered. What's really challenged your thinking?
I wasn't sure about most, but probably the one that I think about probably more often is Dillon and Tinsley, these authors in the US. What they found was near misses, and their work really challenged the conventional logics that near misses, collecting and analysing near misses are really good. They build our safety imagination, our sensitivity to emerging risks. What their research has found, they've done quite a number of studies which have supported this in different fields, not just the usual uni students, but they found that literal NASA rocket scientists, engineers, fall into the same sort of biases. What they found was actually near misses can blunt us to risk as much as they can actually sensitise us. And they define different types of near misses. There was like a vulnerable near miss and a successful near miss. What they found was quite often, unless the near miss was coupled with a really profound, immediate sense of dread or danger, the near misses actually desensitised people to those issues. So they were likely to take greater risks when they had these near-miss reporting than they would have otherwise taken. To me, it's probably the most surprising because you do think near-misses, that's got to be good to collect those things and analyse them and get people thinking, but they found it's actually the opposite unless you can couple it. And this was actually jet pilots too, like aviation pilots and engineers and everyone you can think of, the quite a bit of research. So I think that one is probably the most interesting and sort of contrary sort of counterfactual finding I can think of.
That's amazing, mate. Look, I have to ask you about some. Oh, sorry. Okay. On you go, Josh.
Are you opening up to the audience?
Well, I kind of did, but I was because I sort of sent all my questions to Ben. I was.
Oh, that's not an issue. I don't mind.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bit of a personal one and it's a fucking bit left field.
Beep.
So a couple of years ago, I watched you present, and you were basically at the back of the room, and you had a set of palm cards, and that's how you were like basically getting ready for your presentation. You seemed really nervous, so I gave you the customary, just remember, don't fuck it up. So hopefully you remember that you were about to talk. So when you walked up at Wollongong, you were just this confident speaker. There was no palm cards to be seen. You were just in the zone. What's changed, man? Because we need to communicate to our people. We need to communicate to leaders. So just, is there any techniques that you've done, or have you just taught yourself over time and got more confident? I know it's a weird one, but it was...
Like, I'm picturing you in your underwear right now. I mean, that's helping me a lot.
Do you need a bucket?
You're not wearing that G-banger, are you?
Oh, you know the green I
Yeah, I
like.
know. That's what I
Safety
mean.
first, right?
Oh, Jesus, you're right.
You know what? I still had palm cards at Wollongong. I don't mind public speaking. I prefer to use palm cards because I'm always amped up on caffeine. I just have trouble sort of controlling the pace inside my head. So the palm cards just help situate me on the key points. So I'm not sure externally what was different. Like you look at the Johari window, I'm not really visible to my external sort of appearance and presentation, but I didn't feel like there was much different for me. I practice, I have the palm cards. I did hide, I was sneakier. I did hide them this time.
That's what it was.
So it was on the...
I did see them.
Yeah, I did hide it this time. I tried to do a bit more commando, I guess, with the presentation. Personally, I do prefer the palm cards because I just inevitably miss stuff that I wanted to say. So,
Can I just tap onto that though?
You're amazing, man. Really good.
There's a stand-up comedy technique called the memory palace,
Yep.
and it involves sort of walking around your house, and you connect everything that you're talking about with walking through the house, and it's hard. Like when I do my stuff, I am constantly rehearsing, constantly. Like I'll talk in front of the mirror, talk to my dog, and I'm like, all right, whiskey, here's what I'm going to talk about. So it's really, but I think the memory palace is a brilliant technique to talk about, and that's something that I'm going to try and use as well. Oh, let's open it up. Why don't you open it?
I was going to say, I didn't realise you had a palace, so that's the first.
just like I say, it's called chunking. So if we have any psychologists here, chunking is where you break up or you actually combine multiple discrete packages of information into larger ones. Much easier to remember larger packages. Yep.
Yeah, I bought my book from the sort of the salvos.
You're exceptional, man. You're really good.
On you go, Christian.
Yeah, I've been
Hey,
Christian.
hey, Christian.
Spoke to you more on LinkedIn than you have in person. Look, I'm in the mining industry, and the challenge I always have is we've got academia and we've got what happens on the front line, and massive gulf and disconnect, as you would probably appreciate. Even us being here tonight, like we're probably the 1% of the 1% in terms of safety and what's happening. So interested in either techniques, strategies, or research you've seen that has successfully taken some of the academia and then brought it back into the frontline world, yeah? Because that's what we ultimately need to do.
So I started in the safety sphere in the human factors area, fatigue mostly, and I always this was my own philosophy, my own thinking about whether it was accurate or not. I don't know, but I always felt like the fatigue world was probably 10 or 20 years ahead of the safety science world as far as translating evidence-based research into practical tools. And you'll see like Drew Dawson's team and the CQU and UniSA, they have a lot of really practical tools that you can convert. And I was wondering why is it that safety was so far behind, and I feel like now there will be a point of this, I think. I feel like now the difference is that fatigue itself is a construct, but the things that make up fatigue you can actually measure. You can measure physiological, circadian factors, you can measure sleep, you can measure vigilance. So I think there was more direct things, whereas safety is a very broad, extremely broad. In fact, look at definitions of safety. In fact, most of the stuff we do in safety is actually unsafety. We investigate the absence of safety more than we measure the presence of safety. I think a challenge than the research, I think the fatigue world had more things to measure. Safety broadly had less tangible things to measure. Why I think that's relevant is I have to actually align with Drew and Dave around the reality-based safety science. I think there needs to be not just more academics going to have their ivory towers. I actually think it's implicit or explicit on safety practitioners building up the bodies of knowledge. In fact, I think the primary duty should be on safety people supporting what they do with evidence. And to do that, I think we need to get better, more directly coupled with the people that do the work. I think we need to focus more on work itself. I think Yop definitely does a lot more of this stuff than I do, but I think people are really happy to talk about and show you what they do. How we actually measure it is of less relevance to them. And certainly there is a bit of sophistication around how you measure, how you observe. I don't know. I don't see that as much value in trying to get them across the line with the ideas. I think you can roughly find out. What am I trying to say? I think people generally agree with a lot of the things we're trying to push, like better engagement. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. More control around, or better design principles. More human-centered, whether you call it human-centered design or you just say improving the sort of safety and efficiency of the work you do, I think it's of less relevance to people in the field. So I think there needs to be more focus from practitioners rather than just the academics around describing, the formative and descriptive research around people's practices. I think then you really don't need to have all the sophisticated theory. Like, you still need to have that from the research side, but as far as the ideas in practice, I don't think you need it. Like, some of the most powerful and provocative ideas, like Swiss cheese, whether you agree with the ideas behind the Swiss cheese and defences in depth, you really can't disagree, or that almost everyone knows it. You could be out in a mine site in the middle of bumfuck Idaho, and people are going to know Swiss cheese. Like 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 are going to know Swiss cheese. I think that's what I like about Cynefin. Cynefin passes what Dave Snowden says, like the handkerchief test. You can draw it on the back of a handkerchief or a handkerchief in a pub. I think that's where we need to go with the reality-based safety sciences, getting things that make practical, intuitive sense to people. The researchers can worry about the sort of fluff behind the scenes. I don't think I answered your question. I'm sorry. That's probably
I
a
was
lot.
going to ask a question, but now I just want to rephrase it as a statement. More translational research.
I agree.
All right, wonderful. Well, I was going to say one more question because I really want to get the music questions because this guy's going to be having amazing stuff. All right, on you go, Renee.
Really quick one. Renee here. When you're looking at that research and that academic space, where do you see the gaps that would be great to be filled with those people coming up into that research space?
Sorry, can you rephrase that?
So what gaps in the research do you see?
She wants to do a PhD, what should she do?
Okay, so it was Eric Holdnagel said this one of his earlier papers or books. He said, what we don't need any more of are models of accidents. He said, what we need models of is normal work, like everyday work. How does work normally is successful? When you think about it, almost everything we have is descriptions of unsafety, royal commissions, accident reports. I'll fall into that trap too. In fact, in my defence, it's really hard to find a royal commission when something doesn't catastrophically blow up. So to do that, you actually have to go out there and find the opportunities to research. So I think when I look at the gaps from my perspective, I think most of the gap is around describing informative work around normal work, or daily work, everyday work. I think that's really sorely missing compared to all the stuff we have around accidents. And I personally find accidents really insightful, but you really have to be mindful that the things that you find in an accident are still there. They were there the day before, they're probably there years before, and they're still in the organisations that aren't blowing up. So which ones are actually important? I fell into that trap with my auditing paper. I looked at all the factors around the auditing failures, as we saw it, but those same factors are still in play in probably successful audits too. So yeah, I think personally that a lot of the gaps as I see it are around describing work, successful, normal, everyday work, and sort of all the constraints and variability in that. More sophisticated thinking there would be good.
All right, one last sensible question, and then we go to carry on. All right. Mate, you must have a book in you. You must, right? So, what would you call it? Have you got a book in you, and what would you call it?
The answer is no, and I'm not going to write a book.
Yup, must read more research.
I'm actually a terrible writer. I couldn't do it. I couldn't subject myself or anyone else to having to read a book. The research I published is taking me a long time and a lot of assistance from my supervisors to get it to that readable state. A book I just couldn't do. I'd probably call it something aligned with Barry Turner's work. Like, in fact, Man-Made Disaster was originally Failures of Foresight, so maybe it's a tweak of Foresight's of Failure or something. I don't know, nothing that interesting, but I couldn't think of anything worse apart from drilling a hole in my head.
All right, we'll talk about drilling your hole in your head. So, I know that you dance, and the reason I know that he dances is because he was dancing with me in Wollongong. The thing that I don't remember though is what song was it? What song were we dancing to? Can you remember?
Safety dance.
Nah, no way. We didn't dance to the safety dance. Ben and I, we are of similar vintage.
I can't remember.
Nah, no. But to be fair, we
I
did.
presented that following morning, and that sucked. That really did.
I know there was a harsh lesson in that one, I think,
Yeah.
mate. But yeah,
I don't remember what the lesson was, but there was a lesson. Yeah.
So I can't remember. You can't remember. What song would be enough to get you up on the dance floor?
Yeah,
And cut a rug?
this one's very consistent. It's Journey, Don't Stop Believing. Like, absolutely, yep.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Mate, who's the first band that you saw live?
This may surprise people, but I'm not actually that interesting or cool. So I actually didn't go to my first concert till I was an adult. It was one of the big day outs. But Tool headlining. Muse absolutely rocked it. The Killers they're good, but they're a little bit over. I think they were at that stage they were famous, but Muse just absolutely nailed it. So that's actually the only concert I've been to apart from Safety Fest.
Oh, yeah, but that was, I mean,
in no way is that depressing to say.
No way, mate. No. Mate, you surprised me because you can cut a rug, mate. You can go for
It's
it.
out of necessity if I have to.
So, Ben, if you could go back in time and hear a song for the first time, what song would that be?
Definitely Mayonnaise by Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah. And then I was thinking maybe Lynyrd Skynyrd with Freebird or Procol Harum, White Shadow Power, but I think Mayonnaise is probably number one.
Oh, I like you more.
Amazing. Guys, how amazing was that? Absolutely brilliant. Everybody, Ben Hutchison.